Hello everyone. Today, Will in this novel makes me love and hate him at the same time. He wakes up in the morning to find his hair in a mess, and the protagonist is giggling nearby. But that's nothing compared to the unexpected twist when Will feels nervous and uneasy around the alpha, which contrasts sharply with his strong image on the training ground. Isn't this contrast captivating? Moreover, the protagonist's omega abilities gradually emerge during this process, triggering more stories. Don't worry, I'll tell you all about it. Chapter 15. I gradually stirred from my slumber, immediately aware that my limbs were immobilized. As my eyes fluttered open, adjusting to the soft dawn light filtering through the window, I found myself enveloped in Will's protective embrace. During the night, he had shifted to the center of the bed, cradling my small form against his broad chest. His muscular arms formed a secure cage around me, while his legs created an additional barrier. The warmth of his breath tickled my neck fur, and I realized that escape was impossible. Resigned to my predicament, I allowed myself to relax, focusing on the soothing rhythm of Will's steady heartbeat and deep breath. My keen senses, attuned to our surroundings, detected no movement in the main pack house, though I was acutely aware of the vigilant sentries patrolling outside. After basking in the comfort of Will's embrace for a while, curiosity got the better of me, and I attempted to wriggle free. However, my efforts were futile. Will's unconscious response was to tighten his hold, pulling me in closer to his chest with a sleepy grunt. This backfired attempt reminded me of past encounters with pack dynamics, particularly when Phil had asserted his dominance by pinning me down. Now trapped in Will's arms, I found myself equally immobilized, unable to shift or move significantly. Twisting my head as much as possible, I surveyed my situation, confirming that escape was indeed impossible without external assistance. As I contemplated my predicament, I noticed that Will had nestled his head lower, bringing his enticing hair within reach. The mate bond tugged at my instincts, and I found myself unable to resist the urge to investigate further. Gently, I nuzzled my nose into his soft locks, inhaling deeply. The scent was intoxicating, reminiscent of a lush forest, and I reveled in it. Driven by an inexplicable impulse, I began to tenderly groom his hair with my tongue, savoring the intimate moment. Will stirred, mumbling a drowsy, He lifted his head, gazing at me through half-lidded eyes. I cowled and helped but snicker at his disheveled appearance, with one side of his hair thoroughly soaked and sticking up in all directions. Blinking sleepily, he gradually realized his position on the wrong side of the bed. Abruptly, he pulled away, leaving me yearning for his warmth. Sitting up, Will ran a hand through his wet hair, confusion evident in his voice. What happened? He fixed me with a bewildered stare, his hair a comical mess. I shifted back to my human form, covering my mouth to stifle my laughter at his expression and wild hair. I honestly have no idea why I did that, I admitted, still giggling. Although in my defense, my courses of action were rather limited. He shook his head to clear it. I seem to recall doing something similar to you yesterday, so I know the feeling. I sat up and fiddled with the tattered hem of my t-shirt. So, what are our plans for today? Will glanced at the clock. If you are up for it. I usually go for a short run in the morning before grabbing some breakfast. I do have to help with training today, so that will leave you with some free time. Later this afternoon, the alpha should return, and he will probably do the acceptance ceremony this evening. I replied, I am up for a run. I won't be able to run for long, so I can come back and help the cooks with breakfast. That will give you time to have a good run for yourself. There was a certain freedom running with Will, or any werewolf for that matter. I could run without having to worry that some predator might pounce on me. I quite enjoyed it after so many years of cautious, slow travel. I glanced towards the door as I sensed a powerful aura approaching the pack house and commented, Looks like the alpha got back early. He looked at me in confusion. How do you know that? I grinned at him, realizing that I hadn't gotten around to telling him about my abilities yet. I had been designated as an Omega, even if I hadn't been born one. The Alpha's designation was still strong enough to allow the Omega's senses to form. I didn't lose the senses when I left the pack, although the Omega status disappeared the instant he passed away. Being designated as an Omega was considered a huge insult to most wolves, although it hadn't bothered me since I had more problems with just being a runt. It took an Alpha come and either during an acceptance ceremony or during a big pack announcement to designate someone as an Omega. Such occurrences were quite rare and required careful planning. Simply being assigned an Omega's duties for punishment was different and was much more common. Just like any common punishment, anyone with sufficient authority could do it. One simply had to do the duties. Being assigned an Omega's duties didn't truly make one an Omega, and it didn't give them the abilities. Besides, it took almost a year for the Omega's abilities to form. And as handy as those abilities were, most wolves could not tolerate the degrading thought of truly being an Omega at all. While a few wolves thought that it would be interesting to be able to sense other wolves around you, most pack members thought that it was pretty pointless. Will looked stunned. I wasn't aware that you had been designated as an Omega. He blinked as he refocused on me. Can you tell if he is in a good mood? If so, I can introduce you to him before he gets distracted with the pile of paperwork on his desk. I checked my senses once more before confirming. Yes, he is in a good mood. Hopefully, he will have finished kissing Emily by the time we get down there. Will chuckled as he got out of bed and grabbed a set of clean clothes. He headed to one washroom while I headed to the other. I waited for him by the top of the stairs, and he joined me shortly afterwards. I grinned as I noticed that he had actually had to wash his hair in order to get it back into some sort of order. He held my hand as we ascended the stairs. I murmured, "They have moved into the small side living room. They have also stopped kissing." He nodded and altered his route. Will knocked softly on the door frame and the two sitting on the couch looked up. It didn't surprise me to see that the Alpha was a huge, heavily built man with more muscle than seemed possible. Emily smiled as she spotted us. We were just discussing your mate. This is Jade. Dade. This is Roland. I bowed my head. Pleasure to meet you. Alpha. He nodded as he examined me. I was quite glad to hear that Will met his mate. I know you are hoping to go through the acceptance ceremony, but I do have to ask the standard questions first. I nodded as I watched the couple without truly focusing my gaze on them. Staring directly at an Alpha or his mate was a sure way to stir up an Alpha, especially since I was not part of his pack yet. He rose up to walk in front of me. I felt the shift in Will's mood as the powerful male approached, even though his expression or stance didn't change. I squeezed his hand in reassurance, and he exhaled slowly. The Alpha's eyes caught the small motion while also detecting Will's faint change of breathing. The Alpha seemed amused by Will's reactions and said, "The mate bond seems quite strong already. Relax. Will, I mean her no harm." Will sighed heavily. In theory, I know that. In reality, rationality simply doesn't enter the equation when it comes to the mate bond. Emily laughed merrily from the couch. You should have seen Roland when he first met me. I have to admit that you are handling it much better than he did. The mate bond is much more intense for high-ranking wolves. Your enforcer rank was designed to protect others, so it will be hitting you quite hard since your protective tendencies are already heightened. I am actually surprised that you didn't growl at Roland when he approached like that. Will winced as he replied, "You have no idea how close I came to it. The only thing that stopped me was the thought that it might scare Jade." The Alpha smirked at Will, not overly bothered by Will's words. "If you plan on growling at me, at least do it in private like this so I don't have to uphold my status. You can chase me around the training field later if you want to get revenge." I relaxed slightly as I picked up the close friendship between Roland and Will. Most Alphas were as close to their enforcers as they were to their betas. They trusted their beta at their side, while relying on the enforcers to look after the pack while the Alpha was away. Such trust and friendship allowed for a fair bit of leeway in the formality department. The Alpha focused on me once more. Just the standard questions that any rogues get when they plan on joining. He gave Will a pointed stare. Will grinned back, showing he knew that Roland was not going to question me more than anyone else. Roland looked at me closely as he asked, "How long have you been a rogue?" "Since I was 12 when my pack was wiped out by ferals. I did join a pack for just over a year a while back." "Why did you leave that pack?" "It was the Black River Pack, and I left when Doug passed away." I saw all three wince with that statement. With no children of their own, the Black River Pack story hit far too close to home for this group. "Have you ever attacked or killed anyone?" I shook my head no. Will looked amused at the question, probably recalling our wrestling match. "Do you have any enemies who may be searching for you?" I once more shook my head. "Not to the best of my knowledge." He tilted his head as a look of slight confusion crossed his face. He intently stared at me while his eyes occasionally unfocused. He asked, "How are you doing that?" I blinked in confusion. Doing what? I had no clue what he was talking about. I could sense confusion from Will and Emily as well, which meant they had no clue what he was referring to either. He took a step closer to peer into my eyes. Ignoring Will's low growl, Roland slowly said, "Every time I try to closely focus on you, it is like my attention just slides off of you. As an alpha, I normally have no problems concentrating on someone with single-minded intensity, and yet, those skills do not seem to be working on you." I blinked as realization set in. I had unconsciously been using my Omega abilities to maintain a passive stance in the presence of an alpha. It was a skill that most stone gazer used at some point to avoid attention or try and get out of a room undetected by upset individuals. It was also used to make oneself seem less of a threat, and I tended to use it automatically around large groups or powerful individuals. My stance was so passive that no trace of threat could be seen or sensed, and most wolves would completely ignore me like this. Apparently, it also prevented an alpha from truly focusing his attention on me during an interrogation. I had the Omega abilities, but no longer had the Omega rank, so he would not have been able to sense it and connect the dots. I blushed slightly in embarrassment and stopped using that ability. "Oh, I think I know now. Sorry about that. I had been designated as Omega during my stay with the Black River Pack. I didn't realize that the passive stance ability would have such an effect. In truth, I didn't even realize that I was using that ability until you mentioned it." He examined me and relaxed now that his own ability to focus was working again. "Interesting. Do you have all of the Omega abilities?" I shook my head. "No, I have the common ones. There are some abilities that only a born Omega can have, and I lack those." In curiosity, Emily asked, "How good are you at using the various abilities?" Gaze's skills with the various abilities varied by individual. I shrugged. My ability to sense individuals and the moods of those nearby is pretty strong. My passive stance ability is about average. My truth-sensing ability is weak and takes deliberate concentration in order for me to detect lies, but it is fairly reliable. My skill at differentiating edible plants apart from poisonous ones is decent, mostly from practice. My ability to calm down people is nearly non-existent. It might as well not even exist in human form and is only somewhat effective in wolf form if they have no aversion to runts. I don't have any of the other abilities. Will looked intrigued with that bit of information. The alpha nodded without surprise. "Then I don't really have any concerns. Welcome to Nightwind Pack. I have some time after supper for the X that works for you." I bowed my head slightly. "Thank you." Roland went back to sit by Emily, so Will and I took our leave as we headed out for our morning run. Chapter 16. I chuckled as I darted under a huge rose bush and kept going. Will had to go around due to his sheer size. I found it quite amusing to choose the path that required him to detour the furthest. At least he was getting more exercise than he would if he was just running beside me. Our lazy run had turned into a game of catch me if you can, and Will hadn't been able to get close to me for almost 5 solid minutes despite the fact that I hadn't stopped to hide. It was a pretty impressive feat for me considering I had never been in this part of the forest before. The situation was starting to rile him up though he could see me, but Cal didn't get to me. This had the mate bond goading him into moving faster and trying harder to get to me. I used my senses to ensure that no other pack member was anywhere near our trajectory. I really didn't want anyone to stumble between Will and me when the distance between us already had the mate bond agitating Will. We hadn't had much time to get used to the mate bond and how it made us react, so we weren't exactly prepared for unusual circumstances. Will was still enjoying the game despite the side effect the game was having on him, but I was sure how he would react if someone came between us. His control had been quite good so far, but it was something you wanted to test with pack members in unexpected situations. I changed my direction suddenly to leave my way under another rather large bramble bush. Such low-sprawling plants were getting fewer and fewer as we went along, and they were the real reason that Will had not yet caught me. I heard a faint huff of frustration from Will. The plants were keeping him a decent distance away. If I changed direction, he had to make a large detour to get near the bush I was running under. It was keeping him on his toes, though. My choices were getting fewer. There were only a few trees around here, nothing that Will was unable to get between or around with ease. The various bushes were thinning out as we approached a rather large meadow, and the spaces between them were getting larger. I put on a burst of speed to cross the distance between two such plants. Will charged forward, but I just managed to dart under the plant before he got to me. I didn't slow down my run as I planned my next crossing. The neighboring plants were further away. I aimed for the closest one and went full tilt. Will put on a burst of speed that I wasn't aware was possible as he rounded the previous shrub and headed for me. I tried to weave, but he used his forearms to block my exit as he slid to a stop. He crouched down and trapped me between his forepaws before laying down and gently pinning me under his neck. I wiggled a bit before simply laying there and panting from my run while my tail attempted to wag as I grinned. That run had been fun, and I had definitely gotten my exercise. I was surprised to notice that Will was breathing somewhat heavily as well. That was odd. Such a run shouldn't have tired any normal wolf, let alone an enforcer. I tried to squirm out to no avail. He was simply too big. I could feel the sparks rolling across my skin where his fur touched mine. I blinked as I picked up an undercurrent of powerful emotions in Will's mind. I had only been keeping tabs on his surface emotions since I didn't like prying. The emotions beneath the surface had gone unnoticed by me simply because of the distance previously between us and the fact that he had been suppressing them. I carefully extended my senses towards him and was stunned at the swirl of emotions that were starting to overpower Will. It was a wonder that he had been enjoying himself seconds ago. I have no idea how he had suppressed it so well or even how he was still mostly in control. Our little game had the mate bond in severe overdrive, and it had somehow tapped into the enforcer's desire to protect. At the moment, his control hung on by a thread, and that thread was the fact that he had me in direct contact with him. My brush with his emotions left me somewhat stunned from their force. I had no idea that the mate bond could produce such powerful emotions. It was a good thing that it had only been plants keeping him from me. He would have destroyed anything else. The waves of protectiveness that had started rolling off of him were practically visible at this point. I could feel the mate bond's drive for him to mark and claim me as his. He was fighting it. But the mate bond was only focused on the fact that we had been separated and my shoulder did not show his mark. A mark warned off other males, and he was having some control issues without that mark on me as a declaration that I was his. I stopped moving, hoping that the mate bond would ease up now that he had caught me. Hopefully he could regain control quickly. I was fervently glad that no one and nothing was near us, nothing he could consider a threat. At this moment, he would probably snap if anyone or anything approached. I decided my best course of action would be to remain still and wait until he regained control. 5 minutes later, I nudged Will and whined lightly. He hadn't moved yet, and I was still pinned. I felt his emotions shift more towards concern. I was surprised when he suddenly shifted into human form and crushed me to his chest in a bear hug as he sat on the grass. I nuzzled the side of his neck as reassurance since I for control. Thankfully, he was starting to get the upper hand on it as the mate bond eased up. His voice was gruff with strain. Give me a moment. I almost lost control back there. I rubbed my head along the front of his shirt as I tried to comfort him. I slowly felt him regain control. Eventually, he sighed and loosened his grip so that I could slide down into his lap. I looked up at him in concern, but his eyes were closed as he still tried to calm himself down. It had been bad enough for me just brushing along his emotions. It must have been much worse for him since he had actually felt the emotions and the direct effects of the mate bond. A few moments later, he opened his eyes. Sorry, I had no idea that the mate bond would have that effect on me. I tilted my head before shifting as well. I was now sitting sideways in his lap, and I wrapped my one arm as far as it would go behind his back. I said, I knew you were starting to get riled up, but since I could feel your happiness, I kept going. Perhaps, next time, if the mate bond gives you problems, just shift and let me know. The fact that I was sitting on his lap had him momentarily stunned, but he lost no time in wrapping both arms around me and pulling me to his chest. He dropped his face against my neck to inhale my scent, and I felt him relax. His voice was muffled and the heat from his breath sent goosebumps down my back. I will have to keep that in mind, although I hope it never gets to that point again. At first, it was too bad, but then it just seemed to magnify without warning. It was my turn to struggle for control as his breath, scent, presence, and voice all made dirty thoughts appear in my head against my will. That conniving mate bond was starting to play dirty. I could sense the Will was almost back to normal now. It was just me who had to get my head on straight. He chuckled as he lifted his head. I think we had better get going. If your arousal gets any more noticeable, we won't be leaving this forest for quite some time. I fleshed the tread before shifting into my wolf shape and hopping out of his lap. I was thankful that it was impossible to tell if a wolf was blushing, although my body language would still tell tales on my embarrassment. He grinned before shifting as well. He patted forward to give my ear a few licks that sent more goosebumps down my back. I reached up to give him a lick under his chin. I turned and started trotting down the trail before I gave the mate bond any more chances to mess with my head and body. I kept to the main trail, and Will walked alongside me. I could sense his amusement at my reaction as well as a few firmly suppressed flickers of desire. Thankfully, his flickers were disappearing as my arousal faded. Neither of us was in a hurry to leave the forest. We both wanted the side effects of our run to completely fade before reaching the town. I knew for a fact that if Will could pick up any trace of arousal on me, that he would not let me step foot in the town while I was unmarked. Unmated males could be hormone-driven idiots at times. The presence of a mark would make them keep their distance since the female would have no interest in them and her mate wouldn't tolerate any advances. We shifted at the edge of the town and walked towards the pack house while holding hands. Chapter 17. The people who lived in their own homes often made and ate breakfast at home, so it was just those who lived in the pack house, or who had been out patrolling, who were looking for breakfast. The dining room had numerous large tables and chairs spread across it like an oversized cafeteria. Breakfast and lunch were of a serve-yourself event. We were too late to help cook, so we just grabbed a plate and filled it before heading over to a table. Occasionally, I sensed people looking at me in curiosity while I ate. Samantha and John sat across from us and visited with us. I watched in amusement as Will was somehow managing to eat everything he had loaded onto his plate. I simply could not figure out where he was putting it all. I turned my head in faint alarm as I felt a flare of powerful emotions to the side of the room. I could feel the person's shock, excitement, and ambition as she focused intently on me. Whatever plan was storming through her mind, it included me, and my omega senses alerted me to her scrutiny. Will noticed my sud and distraction and glanced across the room with narrowed eyes before groaning and dropping his face's hand. I glanced back at the lady as she was making her way swiftly towards us. Her low high heels clicked on the floor. Her shirt gently swirled with the speed of her walk, and her tight jeans were some sort of expensive designer type. Her eyes were locked on me. My senses immediately told me that she was Will's sister. From the mix of excitement, disbelief, and accusation radiating from her, I somehow suspected that Will had not told his family that he had found his mate, and she was not impressed with that fact. She came to a stop right beside me and took a deep breath. I felt her excitement flare as she confirmed her suspicion. She faced her brother with disbelief and a touch of accusation. How could you have found your mate and not told us? Will raised his eyebrow slightly. Mom, Dad, and Brad all know. If you hadn't blocked off your mind link yesterday, you would also know. She dropped down on the seat beside me with an exasperated to me. Brothers. They withhold critical. Me too, no information at the worst possible time. Please tell me that you didn't have to put up with brothers when growing up. I felt Will stiffen beside me, but I smiled at her. No, I never had any siblings. She sighed in relief. You are so lucky then. I could feel the tension rolling off of Will, Samantha, and John at her unwitting speech. They hadn't brought up my past in case there were painful or sad memories. Will's sister somehow remained oblivious to the other three applied, as she replied. I'm Tiffany, Will's sister. What's your name? When did you get here? I'm Jade. I arrived yesterday in the early afternoon. She mumbled something incoherent before looking back at me. Which pack did you come from? Will's low growl made all of us glance at him as he eyed up his sister. She blinked at him in shock. I reached out and rubbed Will's arm, trying to relax him, while replying, I was a rogue living not far from the Delby pack. Sorry about Will's reaction. The mate Bond took us for a ride earlier today, and our control listened exactly at its best. Tiffany blinked in shock and remorse, now realizing just how inappropriate her earlier comments had been. Samantha broke the silence before it became uncomfortable. I was wondering how the mate Bond would affect Will. Even though he comes from a normal family, he has the enforcer rank. And from what I heard, enforcers get hit by the mate Bond almost as hard as an alpha, so effective tendencies are amplified. John shook his head. From how you two were speaking at supper, I didn't think you were having any issues. I take it that the mate Bond is strengthening. Will made a wry face. I'll say, if it doesn't slow down, I will be behaving worse than you did when you first met Samantha. Tiffany shuddered and shook her head as she swiftly said, No, let's not even contemplate that. That was a terrible 2 weeks. John grumbled something about how he hadn't been that bad. Tiffany refocused on me. Those clothes look like they have seen some rough terrain. We will have to expand your wardrobe. Will needs to help train today, so I can take you shopping. I blinked at the swift topic change. I had never actually gone shopping before. I had only traded for essentials with nearby packs. I did a mental tally of the money in my backpack and nodded slowly. I wouldn't mind another outfit, and I am almost out of toothpaste. Tiffany chuckled and rubbed her hands together gleefully. I hoped that her tastes in clothing wasn't too expensive, especially since I only had so much money, and I hadn't lined up a job here yet. Will pulled out his wallet and handed a shiny plastic card to Tiffany. Here, make sure that you don't let her pay for anything. There is a limit of 5 on it, so don't go too crazy. That card is for her purchases, although I will let you spend one of it as long as you keep any guys at a distance. Tiffany quickly pocketed the card and grinned at me. I am liking this already. He has never given me money for shopping before. I shook my head as I protested. I have my own money. That isn't necessary. Tiffany quickly overruled me. Then save it for a rainy day. Don't look a gift horse in the mouth. Honest. You will agree with me one day. She grinned at Will. For your generosity, I will ensure that she buys at least 1 pair of lacy undergarments. Will's eyes darkened as he slowly inhaled. He looked fairly calm, but I felt him quickly suppress an intense emotion before it got strong enough for me to identify it. I didn't extend my senses to determine what was lurking beneath the surface either. I didn't exactly trust my own reactions to his powerful emotions at this point. I looked down at my plate to try and hide my blush. I had never owned any sort of fancy clothing since I became a rogue, other than undergarments. I hadn't ever had any new clothing. It had all been second-hand or used, and I had certainly never owned lacy undergarments. John found Will's reaction amusing. John said, that was probably the last image he needed in his head. Tiffany grinned triumphantly at him. I am just helping everyone. Will gets to exercise his imagination. You might get an easier training session if Will is distracted. And Jay gets new clothing. She was interrupted by a rather flustered and excited-looking Mark as he slid into the last empty spot at the table. His eyes were halfway wild with excitement, and he was radiating quite a few strong positive emotions. His eyes locked onto me in excitement. "You were right. It was her. Thank you." The others looked baffled, although I quickly put his emotional state and his words together. I grinned in excitement, saying, "Congratulations." Tiffany gave him a blank look. What rogue dragged you backwards through the bramble bush? And what on earth are you talking about?" Mark turned to her, still excited beyond belief. "When I met Jade yesterday, she asked me if the lady at the library was my mate. No, I hadn't found my mate yet. So anyways, on my way here I decided to pop into the library since the name Jade gave me didn't ring a bell. And it was her. Cassie is my mate." Jaws around the table dropped before they all started cheering and congratulating him. He grabbed a plate of food and joined us. John gave him a bad time for not catching her scent earlier, although apparently, Mark was the type to go near a library at least. Until now. It didn't take long before we were all finished eating. Tiffany stood up and nudged me with her toe. "Well, come on. Let's go shopping before the stores get busy. Maybe we can see the new stuff they are putting out today before anyone else spots it." Samantha and John chuckled at her enthusiasm. I glanced at them and inquired, "How scared should I be when it comes to shopping with her?" John looked at me solemnly. "Be afraid. Be very afraid." Tiffany rolled her eyes and dismissed him. Will gave me a one-armed hug, and I rested my head against the side of his chest as I murmured, "Your sister doesn't have any grudges against you, right?" Will chuckled. "Not that I know of." Tiffany grabbed my hand and dragged me to my feet as she grumbled, "Okay, enough of that lovey-dovey stuff. We're going shopping." I could feel Will's reluctance to let me leave without him as I was pulled out of the room by his sister. Chapter 18. Tiffany held up a skimpy black object for me to see. I looked at her in disbelief. For stores that are supposedly family-rated. "How on earth do you keep finding those things?" She grinned at me. "This is exactly why they are called family stores. These lovely little objects help people increase the size of their family." Shaking my head in disbelief, I said, "I will never be able to look at half of these stores the same way again." Tiffany replied, "Oh, if you enjoyed this sort of clothing. I know several stores with a special display in the back." I shuddered lightly. I was beginning to think her mind traveled into the gutter more than mine, even she hadn't found her mate yet. Tiffany said, "Well, which well? I forced you to get one set, so I won't bother again. Let's see what else we can find." So far, I had 3 small bags, one of which was tucked into the bottom of a larger one. It held the silvery pieces of clothing that I hadn't immediately objected to the instant I saw them. I had been 3 seconds too slow, and Tiffany had ignored my protests as she deposited the lingerie in her basket. I had found 2 pairs of jeans and a light jacket. Tiffany had whisked the items out of my hands and used Will's credit card to pay for them. I didn't have half a chance of sneaking to the till to pay for them myself. I glanced at the contents in the half-hidden basket that Tiffany had found with ease. I shook my head as I muttered, "The less material they have, the higher the price tag. That is just unbelievable." Tiffany laughed as she kept leafing through the racks of clothing. She was the kind of girl who loved shopping and was somewhat put out that I had no real interest in it. We managed to leave this store without buying anything. We walked down the street, and I paused as I looked at the seafoam green shirt in the window. Tiffany was quick to grab my hand and drag me into the store as she muttered, "Finally, a proper reaction while shopping." I laughed since her low grumbling tone was at complete odds with the excitement bouncing off of her as I finally took interest in a piece of clothing. Less than a minute later, I came out of the dressing room in the green top with silvery flowers peeking out from among the darker vines and leaves. Tiffany whistled quietly at my choice of clothing. "Well, if they ever made a top for you. We just found it." Poor Will's heart is going to stop before going into overdrive. A quick walk around the store revealed that the store owner had the same kind of taste in clothing that I did. I picked out 2 more tops that I just couldn't resist. I had plans to come back here one day and buy a few things with my own money. We left the store and kept walking. Tiffany refused to give in until I had at least 5 tops. 3 down. 2 to go. Tiffany stopped to look into a window that had dresses on display. I had no interest in dresses and gazed around in boredom. My attention was drawn to 2 men who were approaching us. I pulled up my passive stance ability in hopes that they would keep going as I turned back and pretended to be interested in the dresses. These men did not belong to this pack. Their scent was of wildest. My hopes were in vain as they paused behind us. The taller guy spoke first. "I bet that dress would look pretty good on you." Tiffany looked up and gave a low growl as she realized that the comment had been directed at me. It looked like she was taking Will's request seriously since her mindset shifted to less flattering emotions. The other guy grinned at her reaction, thinking she was jealous. He said, "No need to get jealous. I can buy you some clothing as well." Their flirting comments were halfway idle, hoping for interest without being too pushy. Tiffany narrowed her eyes, unimpressed with the offer. "I advise you to continue on your way before I tell my brother that you are flirting with his mate." The first guy looked faintly amused. "That doesn't exactly scare me. Simply talking to the pretty ladies isn't a crime." Tiffany smirked, which appeared to throw the men off balance slightly. "Oh, you aren't worried about irritating an enforcer?" Their eyes widened as their posture changed from light flirting to caution. I felt the sudden shift in their mood. They had zero interest in tangling with an enforcer. And at this point, they simply wanted to put distance between us. "Oh, sorry about the misunderstanding. We will be on our way. Have a good day." They beat a swift retreat, and I looked at Tiffany with a somewhat worried expression. "Can we please delay telling Will about this until later?" I asked. "Preferably when there isn't anything breakable nearby. He almost lost control this morning and his antagonist was only a bramble bush." Tiffany burst out laughing. "How did a bramble bush irritate him?" "Oh, I agree with you. I have no intention of telling Will anytime soon. I have told the other enforcer, Evan, and he is going to keep a subtle eye on our guest. Supposedly, they only came here to buy supplies and will be on their way in an hour." Sighing in relief, I replied, "That is good to know." I shrugged as I addressed her original question. "I ran under the bramble bush while he was trying to catch me, and he cowled and get to me. By the time we realized what was happening, the mate bond had gone way overboard, and he almost lost control." Tiffany nodded slowly with a serious expression. "I can see that. If someone can't get to their mate, it can push them right to the edge. It is a well-known fact with alphas, and it probably applies just as much to any beta enforcer." She tilted her head in sudden confusion before asking, "How did you get under a bramble bush without getting all scratched up?" I shifted my weight uneasily. I am a runt. So I simply ran underneath it. I barely even needed to duck." She blinked in shock before she started laughing. She regained control swiftly enough. "You are just full of surprises, aren't you? You might be just the thing that Will needed to keep him on his toes." Her emotions held no judgment or aversion. Instead, she was full of mirth and curiosity. I was relieved that she wasn't bothered by my wolf shape. I grinned at her while saying, "Oh, you should have seen our wrestling match in wolf form yesterday." She shook her head in amusement. "That would have been something to see." "I would love to see your wolf form one day," I replied. "Remind me when we get back to the pack house." I glanced into a store window as I looked at another top. Bingo. Tiffany saw her chance and dragged me into another store for more shopping. An hour later, Tiffany looked at me as we left yet another store. "I am getting the feeling that you are done shopping. I somehow doubt that I could convince you to buy anything else at this point." With a grin, I said, "You would be correct. Besides, if I counted correctly, you reached the limit that will allotted you for your own personal spending." She sighed dejectedly as she gave in. "I really hope that there will be a repeat of this in a few weeks." I laughed as I shook my head. I had met the 5 top minimum limit that Tiffany had set, so we headed back to the pack house. Tiffany had showed me where her room was located. It was actually just down the hallway from Will. Once our purchases were put away, Tiffany led me out of the pack house and down some seldom used forest paths. Her slender frame was shining with excitement in my senses as we made our way to her destination. I followed in curiosity as I waited for her to tell me where we were going. Tiffany looked at me dubiously as she inquired, "Are you sure this is going to work?" She had finally told me where we were going, and then asked if I had any tricks to make us less noticeable. The easiest thing I could think of was to cover our scent. Tiffany was apparently having second thoughts about asking for my assistance. I replied, well, it worked for me for 9 years. It won't hide my scent from Will. But from what I have seen, no one else is observant enough to pick up a rogue's scent if it's masked this way." Tiffany shook her head in disbelief, but took my word for it as she rubbed another fistful of leaves across her legs. I took a deep breath. My normally faint scent had swiftly disappeared under the odor of the plants. Will's scent had slowly been wearing off throughout the day while we were shopping, and it was easily masked. Only the faintest scent of Tiffany's perfume lingered. I grinned at her. "Good enough. From what you said, they shouldn't have a chance of catching our scent at that distance, even if they were downwind." She clapped her hands in excitement, happy that the plant treatment was over. She grabbed my hand as she started leading me through the forest. "Excellent. Come on. I will show you the best spot to spy on them." Shortly afterwards, we sat on to large tree limbs to watch the proceedings down in the valley. It had taken some reasoning with Tiffany to get her up in the tree. She had thought I was crazy when I suggested it, but I had eventually persuaded her to come up. I watched with interest, although my eyes kept drifting back to one shirtless figure as he supervised the others in their training. "If you stare much harder, you are going to start drooling." I snapped my gaze to Tiffany, who was watching me with amusement. I stuck my tongue out at her as I retorted, "Just wait until you get your own mate." She snickered. "Oh, I will probably drive that poor guy completely crazy. I have an entire drawer of clothing just waiting for him." I halfway choked. Way too much information. On a side note, why did you insist on hiding in the trees while watching them? I doubt that they would object if we watched from the sidelines. Their actions are more natural this way, she said. They act slightly different when they know their mates are around, and have a tendency to show off. I wasn't aware that I was about to get impromptu lessons in skulking around like a rogue. I must say, though, I can't pick up either of our scents, and I have been trying for some time now. Would another rogue be able to scent us? I nodded absently as I watched Will. If they were experienced, quite easily. Your perfume isn't quite covered, and the ferns in my scent are a bit too strong. Both of our scents would stand out noticeably for a rogue, but it should be more than sufficient to prevent those down there from catching our scent at this distance." Tiffany readjusted her grip on the branch, still not at ease with her perch. She replied, "I noticed that you seem to like the scent of those ferns. Attempting to balance out scent sounds way too complicated, so I guess the life of a rogue is out for me. By the way, what is your plan for explaining the change in our scent when we get back?" I turned to grin at her. "Isn't it obvious? We went for a run and had a game of tag. You tried to follow me into a few too many tight spots. My scent is normally pretty weak, and being so close to the ground wipes out a lot of my scent as grasses brush against me." My gaze turned back to the field. Will was a natural at what he was doing. This was a side of him I hadn't seen yet. Occasionally, he just watched the others and called out advice. Although he spent a fair bit of time wrestling around in both human and wolf shape while helping others learn various fighting styles. We watched for quite some time until Tiffany grew bored, and we headed back to the pack house. Chapter 19. Tiffany led me to the kitchen, and I gazed around eagerly as I asked, "Can you possibly show me how this stove works?" The ability to bake was the thing I rogue. That had been the best perk of being an Omega. If you were cooking anything, people would leave you alone, and I had discovered that I loved baking. She helped me locate ingredients as I measured and mixed everything together. Before too long, we sat on tall stools against the far wall while the cheesecakes were baking. I turned to the doorway with a grin as Will entered. He promptly came over for a hug and buried his face in my neck. He lifted his head as he looked at me with curious eyes. He said, "Why do you smell like the forest again?" John sounded startled. Second question. Why does Tiffany have leaves in her hair? I glanced over to see John and Samantha looking shocked as the normally, impeccably, groomed Tiffany ran a hand through her hair to dislodge a couple of leaves and a piece of fern. Tiffany looked at me in disbelief as she exclaimed, "You didn't tell me I had stuff in my hair." I suspected that what she really wanted to ask was how and when I had managed to tuck those leaves in her hair. I shrugged with an innocent grin, replying, "After our run in the forest, I am amazed that you only have a few leaves in your hair." Will relaxed as he noticed his sister's lack of scent and put it down to us running around in the forest. I was amazed at how easily he accepted the explanation since it made no sense to me. Their patrols and sentries didn't come home smelling like the forest. To completely cover one's scent with deliberate action. The elf dinged, and Tiffany quickly checked the cakes and pulled out the ones that were done. The rest needed another 10 minutes. John looked on in shock before finally asking, "Since when do you cook?" "I don't," Tiffany said, with a shrug. "Jade did most of it. I am just here to work the oven and other similar tasks." John greedily eyed up the cheesecakes that Tiffany was covering up so they could properly cool. "What kind of cake is that?" Tiffany looked at me. I tilted my head in consideration before replying. "I think it is a chocolate, peanut butter, and caramel cheesecake, but I don't recall the exact name after all this time." Intrigued, Will said, "Okay, I will definitely have to try a piece at supper. How many did you make?" I glanced at Tiffany as she did a quick mental count. "We have 5 ovens going," she said, "so I think we filled 20 pans. Hopefully, there is enough for those who want to have a small slice. There would be other desserts during the evening meal, so it wasn't as if I was cooking for everyone." Will's eyes were wide as he tasted his first bite of cheesecake. Others were having a similar reaction. I asked, "Did I measure something wrong?" I hadn't used a recipe, so it was possible that I had forgotten something after all of these years. John took a deep breath. "This is fantastic. I think we need you to cook more often. The cooks rarely make cheesecake, so this is a rare treat." I grinned in relief before I continued eating. After supper, we headed out to the backyard where several people were already getting prepared for my acceptance ceremony. The beta was on a small raised platform as he put a razor, shark knife on a nearby table. I noticed that Will's eyes were locked onto the weapon. Nudging his arm, I said, "Please promise me that you won't turn my acceptance ceremony into a bloodbath. I have done this before, and truth be told, I have gotten worse scratches from rose bushes. Most alphas barely break the skin, and I am sure Roll won't do anything that would hurt you." Will sighed as he looked away from the small blade. "I know. I have seen it done dozens of times before, but the mate bond is convinced that any injury is a serious matter." An idea occurred to me and I grinned. "Well, look at it this way. You let your close friend give me this tiny scratch. Then you will be able to hear me through the pack link. Is that sufficient motivation?" Will turned to grin at me. "That just might get me through this." We waited as a few more people showed up. Usually, only those close to the one being accepted attended the ceremony. John and Sam had followed us out here. Will's family showed up. Bruce and his group put in an appearance, as well as Mark and Cassie. Will was in the middle of those waiting. I hoped that their supportive presence would help him remain calm. Roll and Emily showed up last. Emily stood with the others, while the alpha walked up the 2 stairs that took him onto the platform. He took his place and motioned me to come up. I went up and waited in front of him. He addressed me. "Do you swear that you mean no harm to this pack, and that you will support it as long the pack follows what is right and true?" I looked him in the eye. "I, Jade, previously rogue of the forest, swear to this." He held up his hand and lightly cut his palm. I held out my hand toward him, and he lightly cut it as well. It was so shallow that the blood barely beaded to the surface. He clasped my hand in his in a handshake, and as the blood mixed, I felt the pack link merge with my mind. Roll and voice echoed both in the mind link in my ears as he spoke aloud. "Welcome to the Nightwind Pack." I responded in the mind link in aloud. Thank you. He nodded at me, and we left the platform. It was over. Simple and short. Bound by blood into a new pack. I started walking towards Will. I had felt his struggle for control earlier when he watched Trollin bring the knife down on my hand. I spoke to him alone via the mind link. I am fine. It barely even bled enough for the ceremony. It will disappear in a few hours. His eyes widened as he heard my voice in his mind for the first time. He ran over to grab me up in a hug and spin around. I felt his relief and wonder clearly in my senses. I was introduced to Will's parents and brother before we all went to hang out in one of the living rooms. Will and I entered the room last. Tiffany smirked heavily as she informed us, "There is only one chair left. I guess you two will have to share." The rest watched in amusement as Will flushed slightly red. I knew he didn't want to push me fast, but there was an easy solution for this situation. I idly commented to Will, "You are overthinking things. Will, there is a much easier way to get back at your sister." He glanced at me in confusion, and I grinned at him before shifting. Those present were aware that I was a runt, but other than a few startled or curious looks, they didn't seem to care. They were mostly curious, and I suspected that none of them had seen a runt before. It simply never occurred to them that I could sit on Will's lap in wolf form, mostly because they themselves would have been unable to do it. That was an odd thing about people. Just because something was impossible for most people, they never took the possibility into consideration. I trotted over to the chair to jump onto the footstool and sat on it while grinning at Will. Tiffany's eyes were as wide as saucers in shock. She had definitely not expected that. Will grinned in relief as he walked over to sit in the big rocking chair. I jumped onto his lap and lay down while Will immediately started to gently stroke my fur. Tiffany shook her head, objecting. "That is absolutely not fair." I grinned at her as I mind-linked those in the room. Perfectly fair and completely logical. Will had completely relaxed, which had been what I was aiming for. We all talked and bantered well into the night. Will didn't even let me attempt to sleep on my side of the bed. I had been leaning against a pillow like I had last night, but the second he got into bed, he pulled my wolf from against his chest. We both swiftly fell asleep. Chapter 20. I woke up and realized I was in the same predicament that I had been in yesterday morning. Only I had one more weapon in my arsenal this time. I simply enjoyed the cessation of all of the sparks for some time. Eventually, I sensed others in the house stirring and getting up. I turned my attention to Will. I tried to free myself, but like last time, he simply pulled me tighter to his chest. Okay, it was time for the big guns. Or at least, the biggest guns that I currently possessed in this form against my mate. Will. He groaned in his sleep before burying his face into my fur. My senses told me that he was still not actually awake. I continued calling him over the mind link. "Will, come on. The cooks have already started the pancakes." Still no response. I grinned as I pulled up the memory of two people smiling at me. The man and woman had warmth in their eyes. I pushed that image into his mind. I didn't expect him to come fully awake in a split second with a snarl of fury. He rolled so that his chest was above me. His arms were braced to either side of my small wolf form as he hovered over me. If anyone else had been in the room, I would have been completely blocked from their sight in this defensive position. I blinked in shock as I noticed that his eyes were nearly solid black. Without trying, I could pick up the fury that a mate possessed if someone else showed improper interest in their mate. He realized a second later that no one else was in the room. He looked down at me, still mostly out of control. His voice was rough and hard as he tried to hold back his snarls. Who was he? The demand was nearly a growl as he tried to discover who the man was. Since that man had looked at me with love in his eyes, I blinked at him, still shocked at his reaction. Those were my parents. Ray shared the image of the two of them sitting on a bench as they watched me play in a patch of daisies as a young child. Realization dawned on his face, and his eyes faded back to brown in his surprise. He must have been so focused on the male in the image that he hadn't noticed that the man had his arm around the lady. I apologized. Sorry. I didn't think you would react so strongly. Nothing else I said or did got your attention. He sighed as he rolled onto his side, finally relaxing now that the mate bond was easing up. He said, "Please wait until I'm awake before doing things like that. It might be best to warn me of what you are about to do as well. Even I am having a hard time predicting my reactions." I didn't even notice that there were two people in the image the first time. I nodded before shifting and giving him a hug. He returned it, and I pulled away as I sensed his emotions straying into areas we weren't quite ready for. Mine were also trying to escape my control. How on earth did most couples go roughly 2 weeks before finalizing the bond? It was the morning of the third day, and we were both having some pretty good control problems. Will sighed as he ran his hand through his hair. I eyed up his hair desperately. I still had some weird obsession with it, and I hadn't taken my chance to play with it. I would have to rectify that tomorrow morning. Will said, "I have a full day of training our fighters, and Tiffany is also working all day. I hate leaving you alone. You can explore the town if you like." I tilted my head in consideration. I have to do something for my keep as well. Would there be any problems with me going mushroom picking? I won't go far, and I will have the mind link if I encounter any difficulties. Will frowned in Will you be okay by yourself? I nodded easily. I did it for years in no man's land without too many problems. Although if anyone crosses the trail of a cougar or bear, I would like to know so I can avoid that area. A normal wolf had nothing to fear from them. And Will's eyes darkened as he realized the danger that such predators posed for me. His eyes lost their focus for a short time. He brought up a hand to gently brush his fingers across my cheeks as the familiar sparks followed in their wake. I have mind-linked all of the fighters, and they now know to keep an eye out for such predators. Please promise me that you will stay nearby and mind-link me regularly so that I know you are okay. His worry and concern were endearing, but I knew the mate bond would make him paranoid with little incentive or reason. I replied, "That is easy enough to promise. I really can't travel long distances, and it would take me most of the day to simply get to the border under my own power. Giving you updates will be an easy way of you knowing where I am in case I get lost." Truth be told, chances of me getting lost or disoriented were non-existent. I had been a rogue for too long for that to happen. I was surprised that he was letting wander me around the forest by myself with so little fuss, but I could sense the conflicted emotions flickering on the edge of my awareness. He was having a hard time, but he was trying to let me do what I wanted. I mind-linked Will for probably the 20th time today. "How is training going?" I felt his humor and relief at my contact over the pack link. "Same as last time. Where are you now?" "Taking a break for a few minutes." I was sitting in a hole in the side of a tree in the forest canopy, looking down at the forest floor that was dappled in light. The view was nice with the yellow beams of light poking through the thick canopy. I took a mental image and shared it with Will. His voice was voiced with disbelief. "Why are you so far above the ground?" "I am pretending to be an owl." I leaned out of the hollow and looked straight down before sending that image to him. "I am not that far above the ground. I am just more relaxed off of the ground when resting if no one else is around. It's an old habit though. I think the biggest critter I have seen is a rabbit. I haven't scented anything bigger either, other than a few deer." I felt his shock roll through our private mind link. "I can see your paws in that last image. You are in wolf form. How did you get up so high?" His voice grew more worried. "Tell me where you are, and I will help you get down. A fall from that height could kill you. Most people couldn't shift in trees without falling out of the tree in question." And Will Woodland realized that this hazard didn't really apply to a practice run. I decided to nip this paranoid mate moment in the bud and quickly climbed out of the hollow. I carefully shifted on the branch before shifting and swiftly climbing down while replying, "Don't worry. I have done this more times than I can count. I am small enough that I can shift in a tree without problem." I climbed up in my human shape. Will's worried voice didn't seem reassured. "Just tell me where you are so I can come and help you down. Please don't shift in the tree." I sent my amusement through the link at the same time I sent an image of my shoes standing in the leaf litter. Too late. I could feel his wordless frustration through the link. In response, I sent an image of him from yesterday from the tree line. I felt his shock and momentary distraction as he likely inspected the tree line around the arena. He quickly realized that it was a memory image and said, "That isn't from today. I am training different fighters." "I know. That was from yesterday." His surprise was evident in his reply. "When were you watching me?" "About an hour before I stuck the leaves in Tiffany's hair." He was silent for a moment. "How long were you watching for?" I grinned at that memory, my amusement evident in the mind link. "Long enough that Tiffany got bored and dragged me away." I started walking through the forest watching for more mushrooms. I had collected quite a few in a big shoulder sling bag that I was carrying. Our conversation had ceased as we slowly dropped the mind link. I sat down on a log on the top of the hill that overlooked the training area. My bag held and possibly hold another mushroom. I was right on the edge of the forest, so I could easily watch the fighting training below. I didn't remember how they had trained in my original pack, and I had never seen the fighting training during my stay with the Black River pack, but I had spoken to several rogues who had been happy to give me some self-defense lessons and tips. I had a couple of good friends among the rogues, one of which had been a fighting trainer, but he had a serious issue with the power that alphas could wield and had gone rogue. He had told me many stories as we sat around the campfire at night. Both enforcers were currently training, and they used slightly different techniques. I compared what I had been told to what I was watching. I hadn't realized that training could be so different between various packs. My eyes seemed to have a mind of their own as they kept tracking back to Will. It was late afternoon now, and he had been training non-stop. He had a light sheen of sweat that reflected the sunlight off of his skin. His muscles rippled with ease as he sparred with another fighter. Mesmerizing. Simply mesmerizing.